All right, so you've got Sanctified for Service, ready to go. Holiness and love, they really are quite the pair, wouldn't you say? We're going to dive deep into this book, try to pull out the core message, and maybe, just maybe, have some of those aha moments that make you really think, you know?
Yeah, and this book, it doesn't beat around the bush.
Yeah.
It gets right to the point, emphasizes how intertwined holiness and love really are.
Totally. It's like they're saying, forget that whole debate about either or. These two, they come as a package deal. So before we even get into the how of living this out, what makes this combo so powerful, so important in the first
Well,
place?
one of the things the book does really well is challenge that common misconception that holiness is all about rules, and love is just, well, a feeling.
Right, like a checklist versus, I don't know, something warm and fuzzy.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, it ties holiness directly to reflecting God's character. Who he is becomes how you live.
Okay, so it's not just about checking things off a list. It's about like inner transformation that then I guess naturally flows outward.
Exactly. And that's where love comes in.
Yeah.
It's the action that flows from that transformation. It's putting holiness into practice. The way you treat others, that becomes the truest measure of your love for God.
I've heard it said people may not remember what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And how you make them feel reflect your heart, which is where this whole holiness thing starts. It all comes back around, doesn't it?
It really does. And, the book goes even deeper into how this transformation actually happens. It's all about sanctification.
Which, the book makes very clear, is a journey. It's not about reaching some final destination, right? Have you found that people tend to misunderstand this concept?
Oh, all the time. People think of being holy as this perfect state, you know, and then they feel defeated when they inevitably fall short.
Right, like it's an on-off switch instead of a dimmer.
This book, though, it reminds us that sanctification is ongoing. It's about continually becoming more Christ-like, but it's a process.
Which is actually incredibly freeing when you think about it. No pressure to be perfect right now. Instead, the focus shifts to growth, to allowing God to work in us over time.
Well, I like to think of it like the difference between a snapshot and a film reel. One captures a single moment, frozen in time. The other, the film reel, it tells a whole story of change and development. Sanctification is that film reel of your life becoming more aligned with God's will.
I like that. So, how does the book talk about actually navigating this journey? Because it's one thing to say become more Christ-like, but how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
That's where it gets really practical. It talks about the Holy Spirit as our guide, like having an internal GPS for spiritual growth.
Okay, so we're not just wandering around hoping we bump into holiness. We've got the Holy Spirit actively helping us along the way. What does that look like practically? How does the book say the Holy Spirit empowers us?
Well, it describes a few key ways. First, conviction. The Holy Spirit helps us see where we fall short, not to beat ourselves up about it, but it's a starting point for growth. Then there's guidance. It's like that internal GPS kicking in, giving us wisdom and strength
Yeah.
to make choices that align with God's will.
So it's not about being punished, it's about learning.
Exactly.
So we're not just left to figure it out on our own. We have the Holy Spirit gently nudging us in the right direction.
And then finally, there's empowerment. We're not alone in this struggle. The Holy Spirit equips us with the strength to resist temptation, to overcome challenges, to persevere. It's that inner resilience we all need.
That's huge. It's like having a secret weapon, but one that requires us to stay connected to the source. Now, the book also talks about consecration, which I don't know about you, but that word always sounds a bit intimidating to me.
Yeah, it can have that effect.
What's the book's take on that?
It boils down to dedicating yourself, your life, to God. It's about aligning your will with His. And it's not just about what you don't do, but about actively using your life for His purpose.
It's about saying yes to God's plan, which might look different than what we'd imagine for ourselves, right? I imagine this could be really powerful for someone feeling stuck, unsure of their direction. What guidance does the book offer on discerning what God's purpose is for your life?
Well, the book really emphasizes that it's an ongoing dialogue with God, not a one-time download. It's not a text message. It's about prayer, reflection, being open to that still, small voice within.
It's like we each have a treasure map inside us, and the clues they're revealed as we draw closer to God become more receptive to His leading. And speaking of aligning with God, chapter 5 of the book gets super practical, doesn't it? It's all about reflecting God's character.
Yes, it breaks down specific attributes, things like love, mercy, justice, and then gives you actionable tips on cultivating those within yourself.
So it's not just about abstract ideals, it's about tangible steps you can take to become more like Christ, more like Him every day. I'm guessing this is where the book really shines, helping people bridge that gap between knowing and doing.
Absolutely. It takes those lofty concepts, those big ideas, and makes them applicable to everyday life. But it's important to acknowledge that living this out, well, it isn't always easy. The book doesn't shy away from the challenges, does it?
Not at all. It gets real about the obstacles we face, distractions, temptations, all of it, the whole nine yards.
And I think that's one of the things I appreciate most about this book. It doesn't sugarcoat the journey.
Yeah.
It acknowledges that it's going to be difficult sometimes, but it also offers practical strategies for overcoming those obstacles. Strategies that are rooted in grace, not guilt. One that particularly resonates with me is,
Okay, don't leave us hanging. What's the obstacle busting strategy that really works for you?
well, it's something we already touched on, remembering that we're not in this alone. The book's emphasis on community, having that support system, it really struck a chord with me.
It's like having your own personal cheering section, but also, a team that's going to gently hold you accountable.
Right.
Why do you think that's so vital in this journey?
Honestly, trying to live out holiness and love in a vacuum, it's like trying to run a marathon in quicksand. You need those people who can relate to your struggles, who offer encouragement when you stumble and celebrate with you when you make progress.
It's about recognizing that we're stronger together, right? We can achieve so much more when we're united in purpose, in love.
Absolutely. And the book offers some really helpful advice on finding and nurturing that supportive community. It emphasizes authenticity, being real with each other, dropping the pretense of having it all together.
Creating a space where vulnerability is welcome, where people feel safe to ask questions, to express doubts, to just be themselves without judgment.
Exactly. It's in those authentic connections that real growth happens. And it's not about finding people who agree with you on everything either. It's about surrounding yourself with people who challenge you, who inspire you, who hold you accountable to living out your faith in an authentic way.
So, not about conformity, but about iron sharpening iron, right?
Exactly.
Where all those different perspectives, those different experiences strengthen the whole.
That's a great way to put it. And the book also reminds us that finding this kind of community, it's not something that just magically happens.
Mhm.
It takes intentionality. It's about actively seeking out opportunities to connect with others, to build relationships, to invest in each other's spiritual growth.
It's about making that commitment to go beyond those surface level interactions and really create space for genuine fellowship. Because ultimately, we weren't created to walk this journey alone.
Exactly. And speaking of not being alone, the book goes back to that power duo we talked about earlier, prayer and worship.
Mm.
It emphasizes that these aren't just check marks on a to-do list, but essential practices that fuel our spiritual growth and empower us to live out holiness and love.
It's about staying connected to the source. So let's unpack that a bit. How does the book describe the impact of prayer on our sanctification?
It frames prayer as a conversation with God, a way to really commune with the divine and align our hearts with His will. It's about opening ourselves to God's presence, listening as much as speaking, and allowing Him to work in and through us.
So it's not about reciting those empty words or like presenting a wish list to God. It's about creating space for that deep, intimate connection where real transformation happens, right?
Yes, and the book emphasizes that in that space of communion, that's where we find guidance, strength, and clarity. It's through prayer that we confess our shortcomings, receive forgiveness, and find the strength to keep going.
It's like a lifeline,
It is.
a direct connection to the source of our strength. You mentioned earlier the temptation to rely on our own understanding, right? Instead of seeking God's direction. Prayer seems like the antidote to that, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. When we bring our decisions, our worries, our dreams, all of it, to God in prayer, we're acknowledging that we don't have all the answers. It's a beautiful act of surrender, trusting that He knows what's best for us, even when it doesn't make sense to us with our limited human understanding.
And it's in that surrender that's where we find true freedom. A
Yes.
freedom that comes from aligning our will with His. Now, what about worship? How does the book talk about its role in sanctification?
Well, the book describes worship as recognizing and celebrating God's greatness. It's about expressing our love and adoration for Him, acknowledging His sovereignty, surrendering to His will.
It's about shifting our focus from ourselves to something much bigger, something transcendent. It's like hitting the reset button on our perspective.
Yes, and the book highlights that this shift in perspective, it cultivates humility and a deeper sense of purpose. It's about recognizing that we're part of something much grander than our own limited understanding.
I love that. And the book really brings this to life through stories, doesn't it? There's one in particular about the transformative power of prayer and worship. You mentioned it really resonated with you.
Yeah, it's the story of a woman battling intense loneliness. She felt so lost, so disconnected from God. But then she started incorporating daily prayer and worship into her routine. Really simple things like starting each day with gratitude and listening to worship music.
It's amazing how those seemingly small changes can have such a profound impact.
I know, right? And as she did this consistently, her whole perspective began to shift. The loneliness, it started to dissipate. It was like being in a dark room and slowly turning on the lights. And in its place came this renewed sense of purpose, of connection, not just to God, but to the people around her.
It's a beautiful illustration of how prayer and worship can really transform us from the inside out. It's not about changing our circumstances, right? It's about changing our hearts, our relationship with God, and ultimately ourselves.
And as we're transformed, that change, it naturally ripples outward, impacting our relationships, our actions, how we move through the world.
It's like this chain reaction of goodness, all sparked by a commitment to connecting with the divine through prayer and worship. Now, the book doesn't just stop at personal transformation, does it? It talks about living out that transformation in the world, about finding our purpose and going for it.
Exactly. And it tackles this whole idea of purpose in a way that's both inspiring and incredibly practical. It encourages us to seek God's guidance in discovering our unique calling, but also reminds us that our purpose isn't always about those grand gestures.
It's about being faithful in the small things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
About those everyday acts of service and love that might seem insignificant, but when they're done with a heart surrendered to God, they can have this ripple effect we may never fully see.
And that's where the book gets really exciting. It shares some incredible real-life examples of people who dedicated their lives to serving God in extraordinary ways, people whose stories have inspired generations.
You're talking about those giants of faith, right? Like William Wilberforce, Martin Luther King Jr., Corrie ten Boom. Each of them lived out their purpose in such unique and powerful ways.
Exactly. And what's so amazing is that their stories aren't meant to be intimidating, but to show us that living a sanctified life isn't about being perfect. It's about being faithful. It's about showing up for God, even when it's hard, even when we're afraid, even when we don't feel like it.
It's about trusting that God will equip us for the task, that He'll give us the strength and the wisdom we need to fulfill our calling.
And that's a message that I think resonates so deeply, especially in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
It is, isn't it? It's a message of hope, a reminder that we're not alone. God is with us every step of the way, and that even in the midst of darkness, we can choose to be lights, to reflect God's love and grace to a world that, let's be honest, desperately needs it. So many inspiring people, such incredible examples. Where do we even begin? Let's start with William Wilberforce, maybe. What is it about his story that really spoke to you?
Wilberforce, he was on a mission. He wanted to abolish the slave trade. Can you imagine? Dedicating your life to something that monumental, facing opposition, constantly and still never giving up.
Talk about perseverance. What fueled that? Where did he find that level of dedication?
The book really hones in on his faith. He truly believed that every single human being was created in God's image, deserving dignity, deserving respect. It wasn't just some moral cause for him, it was deeply personal.
It's amazing how that one belief, that conviction, led him to not only fight for social justice, but to challenge the church, to really live up to its own values. It makes you wonder, what would Wilberforce say to the church today?
That is the question, isn't it? He challenged the church to move beyond that personal piety, that inward focus, and really make their faith tangible to fight for justice for those who couldn't fight for themselves. He understood that true holiness, it's reflected in how we treat those who need it most, the most vulnerable among us.
It's a powerful reminder that our faith shouldn't be confined to a church building. It needs to flow outwards into the world around us. Which brings us to another incredible example, Martin Luther King Jr. What is it about his approach that continues to resonate so deeply, even today?
King's legacy, it's really a testament to the power of love, of nonviolence. Even when he was facing such intense hatred, so much oppression, he never wavered. He took those teachings of Jesus, and they're radical when you really think about them, right? Love your enemies, forgive those who hurt you. And he put them into practice in the most challenging of circumstances.
He was confronting injustice head on, but he was doing it with such incredible love and compassion. That's got to be a difficult balance to strike. The book mentions that he drew inspiration from Gandhi. Do you think that cross-cultural influence played a role in his approach?
Oh, absolutely. King saw the power of nonviolent resistance in Gandhi's fight for India's independence. It showed him that you don't always need force to bring about change, that sometimes the most powerful force is an unwavering commitment to truth and to love, even when it's hard, even when you're facing incredible opposition. A really beautiful example, when you think about it, of how different faith traditions can inspire each other in the pursuit of justice and peace.
It highlights the universality of those core values: love, compassion, seeing the inherent dignity in every single human being. We can't talk about impactful lives of faith without mentioning Corrie ten Boom. What is it about her story that you find so remarkable?
Corey's story, it just blows me away. It's a testament to the courage and the compassion that can bloom even in the darkest of times. She and her family, they risked everything, their lives, to hide Jewish people from the Nazis during World War II. They literally built a hiding place in their home. It was a tangible expression of their faith.
It's an incredible story of bravery, of selflessness, but the story doesn't end there. The book talks about how she and her family were eventually caught.
They were. They were sent to a concentration camp. It's horrific, the things they experienced. They lost so much. Corey's sister didn't survive the camps. And yet, even after all of that, she emerged with a message of forgiveness and hope. She had every right to be angry, to be bitter, but she chose a different way.
And such a powerful message. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart.
It's one of my favorite quotes.
It really makes you think. Forgiveness, it isn't about forgetting. It's not about saying what happened was okay. It's about making a conscious choice to release the bitterness, the anger, so that you can truly heal, so that you can move forward.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
decision that we make. It's not about our feelings. It's about something much deeper than that.
Hmm.
It's about grace. It's about mercy for ourselves and for those who have hurt us.
We've covered some incredible ground in this deep dive. Wilberforce, King Jr., Ten Bulls Mome, all so different, yet all connected by this common thread. If you had to sum up the key takeaway from their examples, what would it be?
I think it's the realization that faith isn't passive. It's not enough to just believe certain things, right?
Uh-huh.
We have to live them out. We have to take action. We have to use whatever gifts, whatever passions we have to serve others, to be a reflection of God's love, God's grace in a world that so desperately needs it.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, that our actions have a ripple effect, and we each have a responsibility to make a difference, to make the world a better, kinder, more compassionate place, and to do it together.
Yes.
Absolutely. And these stories, they remind us that we don't have to do it perfectly. We just have to be willing to show up, to be faithful in those big life-altering moments and in those small everyday interactions, to trust that God will equip us for whatever comes next.
So well said.
This has been an incredible conversation, so much to think about, so much to be inspired by. Thank you for walking us through this.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy to explore these ideas with you.
And to all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope that this conversation has sparked something within you, a desire to not only understand these concepts, but to truly live them out in your own unique and beautiful way. Until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep shining your light.